Across social media, Amara's story spread like wildfire. People couldn't stop sharing it. The girl who was left crying in the rain, only to rise higher than anyone expected. He left her in the storm, the post said. But the man who helped her that night became his boss. The story touched millions because it wasn't just about revenge. It was about grace, strength, and destiny. Photos of her standing beside Mr. E's at her fashion show filled timelines everywhere. Her brand Rainbloom became more than just clothing. It became a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever been hurt, humiliated, or underestimated. People started quoting her interviews where she said, "Sometimes, life has to break you to reveal what's inside you." Tons part of the story became a warning, but Amara's became a legend. Schools, blogs, and even news stations shared her journey, from heartbreak in the rain to standing tall in the spotlight. She didn't fight back with anger or revenge. She rose with grace, and that's what made her unforgettable. Everywhere people repeated her name with admiration. Amara had proven that storms don't always destroy. Sometimes they wash away what's not meant for you, so you can bloom brighter. Her story became a living reminder that when life drenches you in pain, faith and dignity can turn your tears into pure power. In the colorful little town of Oduma lived a young woman named Ifunanya, the only daughter of a kind tailor who had passed away too soon. Her father's small shop still stood by the dusty roadside, its wooden sign faded by years of sun and rain. Inside, the old sewing machine remained where he had left it, the needle still threaded, as if waiting for him to return. Ifunanya often spent her evenings there, touching the scraps of fabric he once worked with. Those leftover pieces became her clothes, simple, mismatched, yet full of love and memory. While others in town wore the latest styles, Ifunanya wore her father's handmade dresses with quiet pride. Every stitch reminded her of his laughter, his stories, and how he always said, "Fashion isn't about how new it is, but what it says about you." Sometimes people whispered about her clothes, calling them outdated or strange, but she didn't mind. To her, each patch was a piece of her father's heart. And even though she didn't have much, she carried something richer. The legacy of a man who taught her that true beauty isn't bought, it's sewn with love. One warm evening while Ifunanya was helping her mother fold laundry outside their small house, her phone buzzed with a message from her old school friend, Nneka. "Funa, you have to come with me to this big fashion event in Lagos next weekend," it read. At first, Ifunanya smiled, but the excitement faded almost instantly. Lagos? A fashion event? That sounded like another world. A world of rich people, shiny dresses, and flashing cameras. She typed back slowly, "I don't think I can make it." But Nneka kept insisting, sending voice notes full of laughter and excitement. "You love fashion, Ifunanya. You need to see this. It's your kind of thing." That night, Ifunanya sat by the old sewing table, the glow from a small lamp lighting her father's tools. She stared at her reflection in the dusty mirror, her heart torn. She didn't have money for a new outfit. All she owned was her father's last creation, a simple patched gown made from leftover Ankara pieces. It was beautiful in its own way but far from the glitter and luxury she imagined in Lagos. She thought about saying no again, but something deep inside whispered, "Go." Maybe it was her father's voice, maybe it was her own heart. "You never know where grace will find you," her mother said softly when she shared her worries. So, after a long pause, Ifunanya agreed. She decided she would wear what she had, her father's gown. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. It carried history, love, and courage. As she folded it carefully into her small travel bag, her eyes watered a little. "Papa," she whispered, "if you were still here, you'd make me believe this dress is enough." And with that, she packed her dreams beside it, unsure that this one decision would soon change her entire life. That night, the whole house was quiet except for the soft hum of the iron and the crickets singing outside. Ifunanya stood by the old wooden table, carefully pressing her father's last creation, a traditional dress made from different colors of Ankara fabric. The fabric was old and faded in some places, but the way it was cut showed his skill. Each patch told a story. The bright yellow piece from a customer's wedding outfit, the deep green one from her mother's wrapper, and the blue one from the first dress he ever made for her as a little girl. It was more than a dress, it was a collection of memories stitched together by love. As the steam rose, she smiled faintly, remembering how her father used to hum while sewing. He would look up and say, "Fashion is not about how expensive it looks, my daughter. It's about the story it tells. Those words echoed in her heart as she gently ran her hand over the dress. Tears filled her eyes and one dropped onto the fabric, leaving a small dark spot. "You always said fashion is about story, Papa," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Then this will be mine." She hung the dress by the window, letting the moonlight fall softly on it. In that glow it looked almost magical, simple yes, but full of soul. She imagined her father smiling proudly somewhere above, nodding in approval. Before going to bed, she folded the dress neatly and placed it in her small travel bag. She didn't have jewelry, designer shoes, or fancy makeup, but she had something no one else would. A piece of her father's heart stitched into every seam. That night she prayed silently, not for fame or luck but for courage. And as she drifted to sleep, she had no idea that the same old dress everyone overlooked would soon make the whole world look twice. When Ifunanya arrived at the fashion gala in Lagos, her heart was racing. The venue was breathtaking, bright lights, red carpets, and the sound of cameras clicking everywhere. Expensive perfumes filled the air, and the women glided past her in glittering gowns that sparkled like stars. She stood at the entrance for a moment, clutching her small purse, unsure if she should even walk in. Her patched dress felt heavier than ever, like the whole room could see how different she was. But she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped inside. First, people just stared. Heads turned. Eyes scanned her from head to toe. Then came the laughter. A tall girl in a silver gown whispered loudly, "Who wears that to a fashion gala?" Her friends giggled behind their wine glasses, pretending to cover their mouths. Another voice said, "Maybe she thought it was a cultural day event." The laughter spread quickly, quiet but sharp enough to slice through her confidence. Ifunanya felt her face burn. Her fingers trembled as she held her purse tighter. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. But she forced herself to keep walking. Each step sounded louder in her ears. Each whisper echoed longer. She found a seat at the very back of the hall, far from the lights, hoping no one else would notice her. While the models walked down the runway and people clapped for the latest designs, she sat quietly, pretending to admire the show. But deep inside, her heart ached. She could almost hear her father's voice whispering, "Don't hide what makes you different." Those words steadied her. She sat up straight, wiped her tears before they could fall, and decided she wouldn't leave. That night, she didn't know that the same crowd laughing at her would soon be clapping for her, and that her old patched dress would soon steal the spotlight from every diamond in the room. Halfway through the show, just as another model stepped onto the runway, a sudden wave of excitement swept across the hall. Whispers started to spread like fire. "He's here! Ademola Karim is here!" The crowd turned toward the entrance, and the energy in the room shifted instantly. Ademola Karim, the man everyone in the fashion world admired, had arrived. Known across Africa for his bold designs and fearless creativity, he was the kind of designer whose presence could change the entire mood of an event. Cameras flashed wildly as he walked in, tall and confident, wearing a sleek black agbada with gold embroidery. His style was effortless, and his smile carried quiet power. People rushed to greet him, stretching out their hands, calling his name, trying to get his attention. Even the models backstage peeked out to catch a glimpse. The host paused the show for a moment, giving him a respectful nod. Ifunanya watched from her seat at the back, her heart racing. She had only ever seen him in magazines and TV interviews, where he spoke about fashion as art and culture. She never imagined she would see him this close. For a moment her sadness faded. She straightened her dress, suddenly feeling nervous and unsure why. Ademola took his seat near the front, but even there, his presence commanded the entire hall. He didn't just watch the clothes, he studied them, his sharp eyes catching every detail. Everyone waited for his reactions. A smile from him meant approval. A frown could end a designer's dream. Ifunanya tried to focus on the show, but her gaze kept drifting toward him. She didn't know that destiny was quietly turning the wheels of her story. She didn't know that in just a few minutes this same man, the legend everyone adored, would look past the glitter, the gowns, and the gold, and see something extraordinary in the girl sitting quietly at the back, wearing her father's patched dress. As the show ended, soft music filled the hall and people began to mingle, taking photos and exchanging business cards. Ademola Karim stood up from his front row seat and started walking slowly through the crowd, greeting a few familiar faces along the way. Wherever he went, the room seemed to follow, Cameras turned, voices lowered, and people tried to stand close just to be seen near him. His eyes moved sharply, scanning everything, the lights, the fabrics, the people. He had a way of noticing details others missed. Then something caught his attention. At the very back of the hall, half hidden behind a pillar, sat a young woman in a patched Ankara dress. Her head was bowed slightly, her hands folded over her lap. But the moment he saw her, he stopped walking. His eyes narrowed, curiosity flashing across his face. The colors, the texture, the mix of fabrics. It was unlike anything he had seen that night. There was a raw beauty in it, a story in every stitch. People around him noticed he had stopped and began to whisper. "What is he looking at?" one woman asked softly. Ademoye tilted his head, his expression shifting from curiosity to pure admiration. Then in a voice that carried through the hall, he asked, "Who made that?" The room froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the music seemed to quiet down. All eyes turned to where he was looking, to Ifunanya. She blinked, confused, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. "Me?" she whispered under her breath, unsure if she was hearing right. Ademoye took a few steps closer, his gaze still fixed on her dress, not with mockery but with deep respect, the kind only an artist gives to another's work. The same people who had laughed minutes ago now stood frozen, trying to understand what he saw that they didn't. And in that single silent moment, everything began to change. Ademoye began walking toward the back of the hall, his eyes still locked on Ifunanya. The crowd parted silently as he moved, people whispering, phones already recording. He stopped right in front of her and smiled gently, his tone warm but curious. "This is genius," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "The texture, the layers, the courage, everything about this piece speaks." Ifunanya's heart raced. She looked around, unsure if she should even respond. Everyone was staring at her. The same people who had laughed earlier now watching with wide eyes. She opened her mouth but no words came out. Ademoye leaned in slightly, still studying her dress as if it were a priceless painting. "Who designed this?" he asked again, genuinely impressed. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "My father." Ademoye's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Your father?" "Yes," she said softly. "He was just a local tailor. He passed away some years ago. This was one of his last creations. I only wear it because it reminds me of him." For a moment Ademoye said nothing. He just nodded slowly, his face filled with respect. "A local tailor," he repeated thoughtfully. "Then he was an artist, a rare one." He turned to the audience, his voice growing firm. This is what real fashion looks like. It's not about price tags or big names. It's about soul. This dress tells a story no brand can ever buy." The room went completely silent. The women who had laughed earlier lowered their eyes, embarrassed. Someone in the front whispered, "Wow," while another quietly recorded the moment on her phone. Ifunanya felt her throat tighten. She didn't know whether to cry or smile. All she could think of was her father, his small shop, his gentle hands, his voice saying, "One day your difference will speak for you." And now, in front of the entire fashion world, it finally had. The room fell into a heavy silence that felt almost unreal. Just moments ago, people had been laughing, gossiping, and showing off their expensive outfits. But now no one could move or speak. All eyes were on Ademoye and the girl in the patched dress. Ifunanya sat there, frozen, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. The same women who had whispered about her now avoided eye contact, their fake smiles fading. Even the lights seemed softer, as if the whole room was holding its breath. Ademoye turned slowly to face the crowd. His expression was calm, but his voice carried power. "Fashion isn't about price," he said clearly, his words cutting through the silence. "It's about soul. This dress tells a story no brand can buy." Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameramen rushed forward, trying to capture the moment. Influencers who had been live streaming now angled their phones toward Ifunanya. Everyone wanted to document what was suddenly becoming history. Ifunanya's eyes filled with tears, but she tried to smile. She couldn't believe this was happening, that the man she admired most in the fashion world was standing in front of her, defending her, honoring her father's work. The same dress that made her feel small minutes ago now made her shine brighter than anyone in the room. Ademoye turned back to her and said softly, "Your father's spirit lives in this piece. It's not just fabric, it's emotion, culture, and courage woven together." His words made her heart ache with pride and gratitude. People began to clap, first slowly, then louder, until the whole hall echoed with applause. Some were cheering out of admiration, others out of guilt, realizing how quickly they had judged her. The sound washed over Ifunanya like warm rain. For the first time that night, she lifted her chin proudly. The girl they laughed at was now the center of every camera, every whisper, and every headline waiting to be written. Ademola looked at Ifunanya with a kind smile, his eyes full of admiration and excitement. The room was still buzzing with whispers and camera flashes, but he seemed to only see her. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Ifunanya," she replied, her voice shaky but steady enough to be heard. He nodded slowly, repeating her name like it was something precious. "Ifunanya," he said. "That means love, doesn't it?" She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned to the audience and said, "Right here, right now, I want to make an announcement." The crowd leaned in, phones lifted, recording every word. This young woman's story, her father's design, and her courage have inspired me deeply. I want to collaborate with her, to create a new collection inspired by her father's handmade style. For a moment, the room exploded with gasps, then applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Journalists rushed forward, cameras flashing like fireworks. Ifunanya sat frozen, trying to process what she had just heard. Collaborate? With him? The man whose name was written in gold across billboards? Her chest tightened and her hands trembled. Tears began to roll down her cheeks, not out of sadness but pure disbelief. She stood up slowly, still holding her little purse, and whispered, "Thank you, sir." But Ademola shook his head gently and said, "Don't thank me. Thank your father. He created beauty long before the world could see it." People in the crowd began recording, shouting her name, calling her brave, calling her story inspiring. A few of those who had mocked her earlier tried to smile and clap louder, pretending they had always seen her worth. But Ifunanya didn't care anymore. As the lights reflected off her tears, she looked up and whispered quietly, "Papa, you were right. Fashion is a story." And that night, surrounded by strangers and cameras, her story began to travel, from that small hall in Lagos to hearts across the world.
By the next morning, the internet had already exploded with her story. Videos of Ademola walking up to Ifunanya, praising her dress, and announcing the collaboration spread across every social media platform like wildfire. Headlines flooded timelines, "Local tailor's daughter inspires Africa's top designer." Another one read, "The girl they laughed at became the moment." People couldn't stop talking about it. The short clip of her tearful smile at the gala had already been shared thousands of times. Influencers who hadn't even been at the event suddenly began posting about her, calling her a symbol of real fashion and proof that talent lives everywhere. Hashtags like #Ifunanya the inspiration and #Taylor's daughter to trendsetter started trending across Africa. People wrote long emotional captions about staying true to yourself, tagging her photo with hearts and fire emojis. Meanwhile, in Oduma, her small hometown, everyone was buzzing. Neighbors gathered around phones, watching the video again and again. Her mother, who sold fabric at the market, cried as she watched her daughter's face appear on screen. Even her father's old customers came by to say he would be so proud of her. But what touched Ifunanya most were the messages she received from young girls across the continent, girls who said they had once been ashamed of their simple clothes or small dreams. "You made me believe my story matters," one message read. And the people who had laughed at her that night, they were now posting her photo with captions like, "We always knew she was special." The same voices that mocked her had turned into her biggest fans. Ifunanya didn't respond to any of it. She just sat quietly in her small room, watching the screen glow with her name. Her patched dress, the one they once called old, was now a symbol of grace and courage. She smiled through her tears and whispered, "Papa, they finally see it, they finally see what you saw all along."
Weeks passed, and life changed faster than Ifunanya could ever have imagined. Her name began appearing everywhere, in magazines, fashion blogs, and even on TV shows. Billboards in Lagos showed her standing beside her new designs, smiling shyly in front of bright colors and bold patterns that carried the same spirit as her father's handmade style. Every dress she created told a story, stories of home, love, and strength stitched into every seam. People called her the tailor's daughter who changed fashion, and she wore that title with pride. On the day of her first official collection launch, The event hall was packed. Reporters filled the front rows, flashing cameras at every model walking down the runway. Each outfit was a mix of modern elegance and traditional soul, bright ankara, soft lace, and creative patterns that spoke of culture and memory. But the moment that touched everyone came at the end of the show, when Ifunanya herself walked onto the stage wearing her father's patched gown. The crowd rose to their feet instantly, clapping and cheering. Some people even wiped tears from their eyes. She stood under the lights, her heart full. That same dress, once laughed at, now stood as a symbol of hope. She looked up and smiled, remembering her father's voice. Fashion is not about how new it is, but what it says about you. And now the world had finally heard her story loud and clear. After the show, she didn't rush to celebrate. She quietly placed her hand on her father's old sewing machine that she had kept in her studio. "We did it, Papa," she whispered, tears falling softly down her cheeks. From that moment on, Ifunanya wasn't just a designer. She was a storyteller, sewing pieces of her father's legacy into the fabric of Africa's future. The laughter that once echoed through the gala had long faded, replaced by whispers of admiration and envy. People who had mocked Ifunanya's patched dress were now standing in line to see her latest collection, hoping to touch the fabrics and glimpse the genius they had once dismissed. Their eyes followed her every move, polite smiles masking the regret that sat heavy on their faces. One familiar voice broke through the crowd. It was the same tall girl who had snorted at her that night in Lagos. She stepped forward nervously, holding her phone like a shield. I saw your designs online," she stammered. "That vintage dress you wore. Can I buy it? Please?" Ifunanya looked down at the patched gown she still wore proudly, the dress that had carried her father's memory and courage. She smiled softly, almost sadly. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "This dress isn't for sale. It belongs to my father's legacy, and it will always stay with me." The girl's face fell. She had wanted to own a piece of history she had once mocked, but now it was too late. Around them, others who had laughed earlier shifted uncomfortably, realizing too late that the courage and authenticity they had ignored were worth far more than any brand or trend. Ifunanya didn't feel anger. She didn't gloat. Instead, she felt a quiet satisfaction, a deep knowing that staying true to herself had mattered more than anything. Each stitch in her father's dress, each piece of fabric, had carried a story that no ridicule could erase, and now that story was being celebrated across the continent. As the crowd watched her walk through the studio, cameras flashing and phones recording, she lifted her chin with gentle pride. The same people who had doubted her were now witnesses to her rise. And though they may have regretted their words, Ifunanya understood something far more important. True beauty, courage, and talent can't be bought, mocked, or stolen. They can only shine when the time is right. Weeks later, Ifunanya sat in front of bright studio lights, her hands folded calmly on her lap as reporters and cameras surrounded her. The once shy girl from Oduma now sat on a national TV interview, dressed in a modern version of her father's patch design, elegant, colorful, and powerful. Yet, even with all the fame and attention, she still carried the same gentle humility in her voice. The interviewer leaned forward and asked, "Ifunanya, after everything that has happened, the laughter, the recognition, and the success, what message do you want to share with the world?" For a moment she stayed quiet, her eyes glistening with emotion. Then she smiled softly and said, "Don't be ashamed of your roots. Sometimes what the world calls old is just history waiting to shine." Her voice was calm but full of truth, and the studio fell silent. Those words hit deeply. The interview clip went viral within hours. Her quote was reposted across social media, printed on shirts, and turned into captions under photos of people proudly wearing traditional outfits. It became more than a fashion statement, it became a movement. Across Africa, young designers began revisiting their heritage, mixing old patterns with new ideas. People who once hid their handmade clothes started wearing them with pride. Even celebrities shared her quote, calling it a reminder that beauty doesn't fade, it evolves. Ifunanya never imagined her simple words would touch so many hearts. She only spoke from the truth she had lived, the shame, the laughter, the redemption. Sitting there under the lights, she thought of her father's small shop, his laughter, and his belief that fashion should always tell a story. As she left the studio that day, people stopped her on the street just to say thank you. And in every smile she received, she felt the quiet echo of her father's words. Don't hide what makes you different. Across Africa, her story spread like a beautiful wildfire. Everyone was talking about the girl who wore her late father's patch dress to a fancy fashion gala and turned it into history. The headlines read, "They laughed at her old dress, but the fashion designer called it his masterpiece." Her name Ifunanya became a symbol of grace, courage, and the kind of beauty that can't be bought. In schools, teachers shared her story with students. In villages, mothers told their daughters about the tailor's child who made the world listen. Her photo, wearing that same patch dress with quiet pride, appeared on magazine covers and billboards. Even people who had never cared about fashion before felt moved by her story, because it wasn't just about clothes, it was about dignity, faith, and the power of staying true to who you are. Ifunanya didn't chase fame. It found her, and she carried it with humility, always reminding people of where she came from. "This dress gave me wings," she once said in an interview, "but my father taught me how to fly." Years later, her story still inspired millions, proof that true beauty never fades. It doesn't need glitter or fame. It only needs time to be seen. The girl they once laughed at became a living legend, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful crowns are stitched quietly, with love, patience, and purpose.